Hi, I'm Doris Purchase, and welcome to Beyond the Frame, a podcast created just for you by Propeller Art Gallery, artists empowering artists in Toronto. Together, we'll take a deep dive into the hearts and minds of working visual artists today and their practice. In each episode, you will hear illuminating and intimate explorations of all things art, and you'll hear it in the artist's own voice. We'll talk process, inspiration, challenges, and much more. Everything you've ever wanted to know about art making or about the artists themselves happens right here. So let's sit back and have a listen, shall we? Today we welcome Ruth Maude. Which ism is it? Under which ism would you classify your work?
It's never occurred to me to classify my work. I think that it's often after the fact that people look back at the work of a group of artists and they label it with an ism. I suppose that the ism that fits my work the best would be experimentalism, if that is an ism. I enjoy experimenting with a variety of encaustic materials, techniques, and tools, and writing about my discoveries on my blog, allthingsencaustic.com. I keep trying new things so that I have something new to blog about. Through experimentation, I'm continuously pushing my art and my process in new directions. And that's an approach that keeps me engaged and excited about my work.
Who's your muse? Influencers, educators, mentors, who has greatly inspired you?
Thank you for this question. I love this question. I owe a world of gratitude to Andrea Bird. It was Andrea Bird who first introduced me to Encaustic. I saw her painting Hold Loosely, Loosely Held, and I was fascinated by the way she told a story, by the luminosity of the wax and the way she incorporated collage in the work. This painting hangs in my dining room, and it's a continual reminder of that life-changing moment when I first met Andrea and first encountered this wonderful medium. At the time, Andrea was starting to offer workshops, so I signed up. And I loved it. I was hooked. Andrea and her artist husband, Daniel Burney, later established the Hive Encaustic Studio at the Alton Mill in Caledon. There, they ran workshops. I've taken many, many workshops there over the years. Andrea inspired me, taught me, and has been one of my greatest cheerleaders. Andrea is a former Propeller member. Actually, my first introduction to the gallery was when I attended Andrea and Dan's exhibition Interplay. That was 2007, when the gallery was on Queen Street. It's a thrill that I'm following in her footsteps as a Propeller member now myself.
Materials matter. What are your chosen favorite tools and preferred medium?
My work is encaustic. Encaustic's an ancient medium that uses heat to apply and fuse the wax. I love the natural beauty of these wax. I'm drawn to the way encaustic painting engages my senses, the way it looks, smells, and feels. Encaustic painting is done in layers. It's a process of building up and scraping away to reveal what lies beneath the surface. Each layer of encaustic needs to be fused with heat. Working with different fusing tools, such as a blowtorch, a heat gun, and an iron, I can either maintain or eliminate texture, depending on which tool I use. Encaustic can be smooth as glass or highly textured and sculptural. I love that encaustic is natural. From an environmental perspective, I'm glad that I'm using materials that aren't plastic, and I don't need to use any solvents in my studio. Encaustic is a very versatile medium. There's such a wide range of mixed media techniques that work with it. I never get bored. There's always something new to try. A great thing about wax is that it can encapsulate and preserve collage materials. So fragile things like leaves, flower petals, pieces of paper can become durable and archival when covered in wax. Encaustic and photography are beautiful together. Wax refracts the light, and it can really add another worldly quality to a photo. As much as I've learned to control the medium, Encaustic does its own unexpected, wonderful things that I get to take credit for. It's so great to say, oh, wow, look what just happened. And how can I make that happen again? As far as tools are concerned, I use a variety. Many of them are my favorites. But I must say that I love my blowtorch. There's something so empowering about the whoosh of the flame.
Slump Secrets. What methods do you employ to get yourself out of a slump?
In the early days of COVID lockdown, I lost all motivation to paint. Online, people were talking about the gift of time they had to paint during the stay-at-home order, but I felt stuck, and I avoided my studio. Normally, when I'm in a slump, I'll take an in-person workshop to get my creative juices flowing again. But in-person workshops were all canceled because of COVID. So I wrote a blog post about it. Writing the post helped me analyze the methods that I could use to get out of the slump, and it helped me move through it. The first method I came up with was accountability. So I now have an online chat with artist friends on a regular basis, and this is a really great motivator. The second thing was to give myself a reason to go to the studio. So Propeller's Unfurled exhibition call came at a really good time for me. I treated it as an assignment, and that made me want to step back into the studio, and I really, really enjoyed the process of making that piece. The next 3 Slump Secrets come from Nicholas Wilton. He talks about the more you do, the more you do. By this, he means that just making a start, just stepping into the studio is the first hurdle. And even if you're just going in to tidy up the studio, you need to take that first step and make a start. And the more you go in, then the more you're going to want to go in. The second one was little and often. And you don't want to wait until you have a big block of time. Nick says that it's actually better to have regular studio practice of short blocks of time. He says we'll be more productive if we work for 30 minutes 3 times a week than one big 90-minute session once a week. My favorite tip from Nick was to play. And he actually says when you are returning to your art, if it feels hard, make it easy. Talk to the kindergartner version of yourself. Invite them to play. Notice what colors do and how fun it is to actually just put paint on a surface. Begin with no agenda except to entertain yourself. Finding the wonder in our art process is what will seduce you back. I love that line. Talk to the kindergartner version of yourself. Invite them to play.
In the beginning. So tell me a bit about your process. Do you have a bag of tricks, lucky talismans, or habits? Where do you start? And more importantly, when do you stop?
Intuitive play is my best way into a piece. Lately, I begin with an underpainting of encaustic gesso, pigmented chalk paint, and collage papers to lay a foundation on the panel before I transition to wax. Encaustic is intensely process-driven. It involves brushing on molten pigmented wax, fusing with heat, and scraping back. I'm often covering up elements completely, only to scrape back and reveal some of it again. It produces a translucent and ethereal quality unlike any other medium that I know of. Sometimes it's hard to decide when a piece is finished. There are always changes that could be made. I often take a photo of it with my phone. Looking at it phone size is a good way to see what might need changing. Another thing I'll do is switch the photo to black and white to make sure that I've got the value composition working. If I have a frame that's the correct size, I'll pop it in temporarily to the frame and prop it up where I can see it. And several times a day, I'll walk past it. If I can live with it for a few days without the overwhelming urge to grab a scraper, then I'm happy to call it done.
Calling all emo. What do you wish people to think or feel when they contemplate your work?
it's very satisfying when someone gets the story or the emotion that I feel in the painting. But each person will bring their own experience to any work of art. What they feel and see in the work may not be at all what I intended, and that's okay. I hope that the viewer is intrigued by the medium and that they feel some of what I felt when I first saw Andrea's painting, hold loosely held.
The struggle is real. Talk to me about your biggest challenges as an artist. What methods do you use to overcome these challenges?
The biggest challenge for me is time. I work from home running multiple businesses, and it can be hard to leave my desk and go down to the studio. It's good that my studio is in our home, so I can work whenever I do have time. I'm trying to put studio time into my calendar to see if that helps. I'm not good at remembering the little and often tip that I mentioned earlier. I keep waiting for that big block of time. I'm starting to think about my upcoming exhibition at Propeller, which is going to be in March of 2022. And as that deadline draws closer, I'm going to need to prioritize studio time. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to overcome this challenge.
Picture perfect. In your opinion, what constitutes a perfect piece of art? And what qualities in your own work would you signify as a perfect work? For example, perfect composition, confident brushstrokes illustrating a concept, or something else altogether.
I don't believe that there's such a thing as perfection in art. This question reminds me of the saying, perfect is the enemy of good. It would be very frustrating if I was trying to strive for perfection. I don't want my self-esteem to be wrapped up in my work any more than it already is. I want to make art that feels right rather than is right. I think that as artists, we make our best work when we let go, when we look inward, take risks, and make mistakes, when we aren't worrying about producing a perfect product.
Art Speak. How do you feel about titling, discussing, and explaining your work?
I do enjoy the artist talks we have at Propeller. I think that is a good exercise for artists to articulate their intention. And during these talks, I'll discover more layers of meaning in my own work. Titling can be a fun exercise. If a name hasn't come to me already, I'll read some poetry and write down some lines that speak to me. I want to convey the feeling of the work without being too literal. I want to leave some room for the viewer to add their own understanding to the work. For some of my works, I'll use a serial numbering, usually because the work started as one piece of paper that has then been cut into several separate works, or maybe they were created at the same time.
Heavy metal or classical? What do you listen to while you work? Or is silence your thing?
Silence. I used to listen to podcasts or have music playing, but during the past year, I want to be alone with my thoughts. Now I seem to need quiet stillness to focus on the conversation I'm having with the work. Encaustic will often have a mind of its own, and there can be a really interesting and sometimes very frustrating call and response between what the medium is doing and my own intentions as I paint. And I need to hold space for that.
Why for art thou? Why do you make art?
When I was young, I thought that artists were up there somewhere on a pedestal, that being an artist was one of the greatest things to aspire to. I was in awe of my art teacher and my mom's cousin who was an artist. Mom was always making. She quilted, sewed, cooked, made crafts, but she would never have called herself an artist. I probably value the arts because Mom did. I think that like Mom, I've always been making. I've been designing and building websites for over 20 years. So that's how I've expressed myself creatively for a long time. When I took that first workshop with Andrea Bird, a part of me that I hadn't felt since high school art class started to wake up. I felt more like me, more like who I'm meant to be.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Beyond the Frame, a PAG podcast. To hear more episodes and to view the artist's works, please visit www.propellerartgallery.ca. Hosted by Doris Purchase, produced by Tracy Thomson, and recorded at the Orange Lounge Studio in Toronto. Also, the Propeller Art Gallery recognizes the presence of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Huron-Wendat nations. We acknowledge we are hosted on land governed by Treaty 13, the Toronto Purchase, the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. We are committed to peaceably sharing and caring for the resources around the Great Lakes and operating the gallery on the principles of inclusiveness as we continue to exhibit art created by artists from all over the world. Thank you for listening.